thanks everybody for taking time out today to join us. As you heard, I'm Steve Jones, been in this industry for most of my career. What I do at Dodge has to do with research. I specifically have the very fascinating job to be able to do deep dives into all the trends that are going on out there, because this is the biggest industry on the planet Earth, but it is the least well understood by any one practitioner because it's so fragmented. I mean, I know that from 20 years of doing projects where I was with my firm. I thought I knew a lot about the industry, but it's so hard to really know what all the trends really are and what they mean to you and your firm. So we do sponsored research, and all these reports are free. So take a note of that construction.com toolkit and reports. There's topics all over the map on this. And so I'm going to cover some of the work that we've been doing on prefabrication and modular construction. We did a couple of different studies recently, one doing a deep dive into just how mechanical contractors are leveraging modeling for and modular, and also did a large study across the whole United States about what people are doing generally with prefabrication and with modular construction. We did a follow-up survey a few months ago, sponsored by MyTech, where we did a little bit deeper dive this time into also the aspect of designing for prefabrication. And I'll get into that. Some of you I know are design professionals with us today, and hopefully you're going to be specifically interested in that. We divided among all those respondents for this last survey across the US to get equal distributions. And I know most of you are in the Northeast here, and so I'm showing you the states that are included. So you'll see on various slides as we go through, when I talk about Northeast, this is who I'm talking about. This is really where I did all my professional years of practice too. So it's an area I know pretty well, near and dear to my heart. You know, and we're better in some cases and not so good in other cases when you compare to the other regions. It's kind of interesting that way. So what I'll do today is just take you through some highlights of this research, separately looking at prefab and modular, because they really are quite different. They're used in different ways. There are different drivers behind them. And then we'll take a look at what some of the challenges that people have in doing more of this, including the fact that, you know, contractors' biggest obstacle that they cite is that designs, as they are presented to them, aren't really set up well in order to allow them to do prefabrication, right? And so that's an area that we need to work on. And so we did a little bit of a deep dive into that, asking both sides, architects and contractors, about some of the details of that. So hang in there with me for that. And then I'll share with you what we found as the opportunities and what markets it appears as if both of these are going to be more frequently deployed. And I'll share all that information with you, along with our economic forecasts for each one of those markets too. So looking at usage frequencies, we broke it down between single trade assemblies, right, where basically one trade is simply doing offsite for their trade, bringing it to the job site and installing it, and then multi-trade, right, where you've got multiple trades working together offsite and doing racks or doing exterior wall assemblies, things of that nature. So when we looked at the total there on the left, and then broken out by each of the regions here, in terms of the last 3 years, and we basically call that current because it's essentially, you know, the frequency with which you've been doing that and are doing that today, for these single trade assemblies, and that's plumbing, electrical racks, maybe risers, head wall assemblies that are just one trade, you know, often just the mechanical or something, steel assemblies, things of that nature. And then we asked about, well, what do you think you're going to be doing? What frequency do you think you'll be doing in the next 3 years? And it's really increasing across the board. And the Northeast here scores extremely strongly, right, which is very encouraging. Then in terms of what types of those single trade assemblies, between the steel, anything to do with an HVAC or a head wall or other things, you can see that this is basically the breakdown, much more in the way of steel assemblies than anything else, although, you know, HVAC assemblies pretty strong. And that same pattern holds true pretty evenly across all the regions. This is one of those places where there isn't much regional differentiation. Then in terms of the multi-trades, this is today's percentage. You see the Northeast actually does pretty well, has been doing pretty well, and is projecting really strong growth in multi-trade assemblies. I really like this because I think this is really pointing towards the much more collaborative, much more integrated, much more industrialized future of our industry, where it won't be single trades fighting for space on a job site in order to work their pieces and put them in. You're going to have much more of a collective approach, much more of a productized approach, right, to a lot of these systems elements in buildings. In terms of what those multi-trade assemblies are, exterior wall assemblies and MEP racks, which are multi-trade going together, are the two that lead. But curtain wall assembly is pretty strong also. After that, interior walls. And then the multi-trade head walls haven't really caught up yet, although they're, in healthcare, that was what I did in most of my design career. That's definitely a great application for it. And when you break that out regionally, you begin to see some more differences here. You see in the Midwest that exterior wall assembly is going to be really strong, and also the curtain wall assemblies really strong. And so it begins to get more interesting as you start to look regionally now. So we looked at what project types people are feeling like this is an appropriate application for and are deploying this in. We looked at 6 different commercial projects, and then we looked at 7 other project types, which are largely institutional, healthcare, or educational, or government. So you can see here where it was and will be, right? The blue is the past 3 years, the green is the next 3 years. And so that warehouse sector specifically very, very strong for this, but low-rise offices, hotels, motels also projecting a lot of growth. Retail stores, not so much in the high-rise yet, right? Just more difficult to do, or even that mid-rise. All right, we don't have that really technology together yet to do that to the scale, I think. Warehouses in particular, I'll talk a little bit about this at the end, but this has been just an incredible skyrocketing market. I mean, when you look at the amount of construction that has exploded here over the last 10 years with e-commerce, it's just incredible. We went from 9% of the commercial construction sector to be a third of it. Just the steady e-commerce growth. It's incredible. It really took a COVID boost. It's one of the only sectors that actually got boosted by COVID because of the incredible explosion of e-commerce during COVID. Anyway, in terms of the types of projects as they spread across the regions, here you see an enormous amount of difference. That warehouse construction, very strong in the West, and even the South and Midwest, not so much here in the Northeast, right? And so the Northeast, in a sense, kind of a little bit damper than some of the other regions in general in terms of where the growth is going to be happening with a lot of these project types. And so in terms of the other ones, the multifamily, healthcare, public buildings, all of them are showing pretty reasonably good current usage and pretty reasonably good growth that's projected over the next 3 years with the use of prefabrication. The types of projects where it's going to be used as you break it out regionally, here you see some really strong differences. I mean, multifamily in the West is just going to be huge, right? And that really begins to fall off pretty dramatically, almost half when you get to our region here in the Northeast. So why is it that people began doing this? What is it that they expected? Right? What were their original drivers? And then what benefits are they getting today? And how do those two compare with each other? And then what is it that they responded to when they said, all right, what is it you're looking for now in the future as you do more of this? And what do you need in order to get there? So those drivers, you can see productivity very much strong, the strongest, especially among contractors. The orange are the contractors and the blue is the architects. And you can see there's differences between them. Something like safer working conditions obviously is going to be stronger with contractors than it is with architects. But there's some other interesting differences too, is that contractors way more see this, twice as many see this as a competitive advantage versus architects. And I think I'm going to get into that a little bit later when we talk about why is it that design doesn't facilitate prefabrication to the degree that contractors wish it would. We look at these 3 things, which were why I got into it. I was hoping that this would improve my productivity, improve cost performance, and create safer working conditions. Then when we go to, all right, what benefits are you actually getting? And we asked every respondent to rate each one of these on a 1 to 5. And these are the 4s and the 5s, right? The higher, very high frequency of getting that. You'll see it maps pretty well, productivity and safety. Unfortunately, cost predictability is the least, but not really way far off. In the 40s there in terms of percentage of people who say they get that at a high or very high. Something that we really liked was that reduced waste really came out as number 1, right, which is a really good and important green aspect to doing this. Schedule certainty, I'm pointing it out now because unfortunately it doesn't score that well here in terms of the current benefits. And when we asked, all right, what are you looking for next? All right, what do you need going forward? What is it that's going to drive you to do more if you knew you could get this? Schedule performance is the number 1 thing. And unfortunately, right now, it's not scoring as well as some of the other ones. It's not bad, but it indicates something to really be focused on and work on. In terms of what people say that they are going to need in order to make that next expansion, right, and grow their practice around prefab, architects and contractors basically same kind of a pattern in terms of more in the way of prefab components, right? Make this easier to work with, and design guides and standardizations. How do we do this? What's the right way to do this? How do we streamline this process, right? So that design is being conducted in a way that enables prefabrication to certain standards that everyone agrees on. Pretty clear here that that doesn't exist enough right now. All right, so this is another area that's needed in the industry. And then more prefabricated BIM objects, right? Not quite as scoring quite as strongly, but still, a lot of people saying that that would really help them a lot. So similar deep dive that we took into modular construction. And here we looked at panelized, the factory-made turnkey units like the bathroom pods or the exam room pods, and then full volumetric, right, where you've got sizable chunks of buildings, right, being lifted and put into place. And we also looked at the degree to which people formally do any kind of analysis before they begin a project or early in the project design stage to say, should we do this modular versus conventional or not, right? Because any kind of analysis like that is a very important step in terms of bringing something into the mainstream. So looking at the difference between panelized, full volumetric, and turnkey, panelized is still very much the most popular and frequent, right? And this is what it has been over the last 3 years. So essentially, this is what you can think of as the current state. And it will continue to be so in the future. Relatively good growth across all 3, but still it's going to be dominated by panelized, right? Flat pack and more assembled at the site, as opposed to bringing in chunks of buildings, either as turnkey units or as full volumetric. And taking a little bit deeper dive here into the next 3 years, and breaking that out by region, so you can see where panelized is extremely strong here in the Northeast. But the Northeast is really, unfortunately, lagging in the more advanced ones, in the full volumetric and the turnkey units, in terms of percentage of people who are going to use it on at least 25% of their projects, right? A little weaker here. Digging into panelized a bit, among those who are using panelized, wall modules versus the structural insulated panels versus roof panels versus floor panels, right? You can see wall modules are really very much the leader right now, and the structural insulated panels are right come after that, followed by roof and followed by floor. You get some interesting variations though regionally here. Much stronger there in the South in terms of the wall modules. You're seeing a little bit of lift in terms of floor panels, especially like in the Midwest. So it's interesting that this isn't going to be equally deployed across the country. Now, among those using the 3D modules, either joined together on the site, right, or it's a flat packed system, or it's 3D modules that are slotted into a structure that can then be transported. This is how that all breaks out. And then there's, again, quite a bit of difference regionally. I mean, in the Midwest, and far stronger in terms of that 3D modules that get joined together on the site. And then, things like the flat packed is relatively consistent, although a little bit stronger in the South. But again, this is quite interesting that this isn't playing out evenly nationally in any way. So how frequently do people actually conduct a formal analysis at the beginning of a project to say, should we do this modular or should we do it conventional? Because we're always interested in what brings a new approach like this to a project. How does that decision get made? As you can see, most people do it sometimes, right? The rarely and the sometimes, less than half the time, but still, there's very few not at alls. But when you look at the people who are doing it as a practice, really 75% of the time or more, that's like a standard practice. Up here in the Northeast, we're like not so hot. That's really being very much led by the West. And in many ways, that follows what happened with BIM, because I studied BIM very closely in terms of its rollout over the last 15 years, and it was really led by the West. And so it's not surprising in some ways, but in a sense, I want to kind of give us here locally a little bit of a kick in the butt. Now, in terms of that same look at the 6 kinds of commercial projects and then the 7 institutional and governmental projects, in terms of where modular is happening and where it's going to be happening, at commercial warehouse, hotels, motels, things of that nature, and commercial. The types of projects, it's pretty muted here in the Northeast compared to elsewhere, which is a little disappointing. But there it is. The rest of the country is really ripping out ahead of us here on the plans for using this. In terms of the multifamily, that's actually cooling off a little bit, and K-12 schools is going to cool off a little bit. The rest of them are going to grow a little bit more. And then regionally, again, you see these big differences. I mean, the multifamily in the West for modular is just going to be huge, and even in the Midwest. And we here in the Northeast, a little bit softer in general. They're not terrible, but when you compare us with the rest, we're kind of below average in most cases. So what is it, again, that people were looking to do when they made that decision to let's go modular on this project? Where are they getting the benefits? What is it that's going to make them want to do more of it? And those expectations. And so you look at improved cost performance, number one, safer working conditions, again, as it was with prefab, much stronger with contractors than it is with design firms, but fair enough. It's still very strong there. And I call them out because they turn out to be really good benefits as well. I'm showing you worker shortages and giving it kind of a dotted line because although, as you'll see on the next slide in terms of benefits, it's not specifically dealing with the workforce shortage, but productivity, right? If you can increase the productivity of who you now have, that is a way of dealing with workforce shortages. And that is the number one across all the regions, is the fact that, when I work modularly, man, it's way more productive. This, again, these are the 4s and the 5s on a scale of 1 to 5. So you get 87% of the people here in the Northeast saying, yeah, man, it is way more productive for me when I can work modularly. So I think that becomes a really important driver. And cost predictability and safety both score certainly within the top 4, which is pretty good. Schedule certainty, unfortunately, is the one that scores the least. It's not terrible. You're still getting 40s, 43s, 62 and whatnot, right? But it isn't the strongest. And again, it is the strongest thing that people are looking for in order to say, what's going to make me want to do modular is if I believe it's going to help me improve schedule performance. So for both prefab and modular, I think as an industry initiative, it's going to be important to see if we can't quantify and tie processes and standards, programs, and things of that nature to make sure that we're going to be able to drive better schedule performance by use of both of these, because that's what's going to pull people towards it. So it's clearly a good thing to do, right? We've just seen a whole bunch of data about the benefits people are getting, what's hard about it, and what's keeping people from doing more. Why isn't every project maxing out on optimizing? I mean, there's a big firm, a big contractor, mostly in the West, although they have some East Coast presence, called DPR. They'll have a prefab brainstorming session with all the trades before they start work. Your job is to have to explain why you can't prefab something, not how you can. The assumption is you can prefab every possible thing, right? And so there are ways to make this happen, but if it were easy, it'd be happening everywhere, right? So what are the challenges that people are facing? Around prefabrication, as I mentioned at the top here, prefab not really being considered when the project was designed. It was designed to be stick built. Now, it's true that's not being taught in any architectural school today, all right? And I'm going to get into in a few minutes the questions that we ask of both sides of this. To what degree are you communicating about it? To what degree do you understand how that can actually be done? But it is undeniably the number one reason the contractors say this is harder for me to do because the design is not set up to help me do that. All right. And then when you look at modular, the availability of component manufacturers, it is an emerging market, right? There are going to be more companies all the time, but of course we've got to create the pull and the benefits that make people want to do more of it to drive that. The number two, unfortunately, is that the owner's not interested. And this is why we publish studies like this, right? To try and get the word out that there's a lot of benefits here if you go ahead and make that decision to do it, right? And then the availability of trained workforce to install modular components, because it is somewhat of a specialty. But interestingly, it's less of a concern to the contractors than it is to the architects. And so in a way, it's almost like a myth, okay? Digging a little more deeply into this aspect of the design here. We asked both the architects and the contractors, to what degree do you agree or disagree with this statement? The design teams could develop their design and documentation in a way that does, make it easier for us to do than they typically do. And you see here how it breaks out. Pretty much everybody's, the majority of people are saying, yeah, it's possible to do this, okay? And then we asked both of them again on your projects where any assemblies were prefab, how frequently was the design firm actually aware that it was going to be done, right? Now that begins to fall off a bit, especially here in the Northeast. People aren't talking about it, okay? Not enough people are talking about it. And then to both of them on projects where the design team was aware when they did know, right? Did you feel like they actually designed it in a way that intentionally would facilitate prefab? Architects, a little more bullish in their response. Sure, we do. Contractors, no, you don't. Not so much. We like to do these biaxial questions a lot of times just to find out, okay, the perspective that's around the table is not always consistent. And unfortunately, that gap is especially big here in the Northeast, like 100% type of margin difference there. So this is a people business at the end of the day. And human beings, we can talk to each other about this stuff. So we ask contractors, how frequently have you actually opened your mouth and talked to the design firm about how it is that they could develop a design? And it's staggeringly bad here in our neighborhood, folks. Embarrassingly bad, and it's happening more out west. I just think culturally, in general, in the West, there's more of an openness to engaging with more innovative things than we tend to have here in the Northeast. But these numbers were disappointing to me, a little shocking. But and then we asked architects, how frequently has a contractor come to you and talked to you about this and try to explain to you, right? And that's unfortunately even less. Okay, so this is just a human. It's so achievable, right? Just between human beings, to be able to have this kind of conversation. And then so we asked architects in general, how widespread do you believe the knowledge even is right now at your firm, your peers, about how you could actually develop a design in a way that would help to facilitate. I think as the architects tend to be a little more bullish in their positivity in some of these things, this is probably slightly inflated, but in any case, it's like a third at best anyhow. And this is really screaming for some help on this. And it can be done from the top down at the AIA level. It can be done from the bottom up on your projects. Just have that conversation. Right? What is it I could do to be 5% better on this one? And then I'll do 5% better next time, 5% better after that, until I'm actually learning from the bottom up how to design to facilitate more prefabrication. So the percentage is rating the quality of documentation provided by architects to support any kind of prefabrication. Again, I think the architects are quite a bit more bullish. The contractors, not so much, a little bit more parity there in the West. But again, you're going to see this difference between perspectives about how well they think they're doing it versus what the contractors are saying that they're receiving. Some of the other obstacles I think are kind of interesting here in terms of availability of a prefab shop locally. And again, that's actually expressed more by architects than contractors, and the contractors would know, right? So in a sense, it's a little bit myth busting, but we did dig into it. We asked contractors, about the frequency of prefab operations, right? And it's actually really pretty good. So that isn't a reason for architects to feel as if prefab shouldn't be more thoughtfully tried to be designed into something and planned for and implemented. Also, that project delivery method. When I have to design bid build, we can't do it. So we wanted to unpack that a little bit because that's shown up in some of the other surveys. And really, the contractors aren't the ones saying it. It's design firms much more frequently saying it. All right. So we said, well, let's unpack it this time. And it's really not that big a deal, right? Even on design bid build, only 18% say it's any kind of an hindrance to it. Right. And especially with design build and IPD, of course, it wouldn't be, but it's just not that big a deal, right? This is very achievable stuff. So as I said before, what I'll do is try and look at what it is we learned about where people believe there's going to be more prefab and modular, and then share with you what Dodge's forecasts are for each of those sectors, so you can see where it is that these opportunities are going to be. The projects that were identified by users as the growth markets in the next 3 years, and the green all the respondents saying that they believe it's going to be a high degree of prefab, and the blue is the high degree of modular, right? And they map relatively well to each other. I'm looking at multifamily. That's going to be a pretty reasonable market. It's going to maintain its momentum. This is our Dodge forecast going out to 2024 for that market in terms of thousands of units. Interestingly, though, any of you who are in that market realize that it's moving away from the big urban centers, which was the traditional heart of the multifamily. And you're getting now into these fringe metros and medium metros, and even really a lot of growth plan for the non-core. Right. Yes, COVID had something to do with that. People wanted to get away from urban centers, but it's undeniable in terms of where this activity is now going to be happening. Healthcare, again, pretty good. About 33%, about a third of folks are saying they're going to see a high degree of prefab and modular. That's poised for pretty strong growth. People like myself continue to get older. We're going to need more and more healthcare. And so this is what we're projecting in terms of starts, in terms of billions of dollars. Hotels, motels, they are very highly sensitive to other economic impacts, right? So it's that they got whacked pretty badly during COVID. And so it's not a super growth market. But in terms of the types of activity where there is going to be, it's that extended stay, and it's that mid-market without food, right? It's that type of facility that we're actually, this tracks the percentage of the projects that we see pre-planning, planning, final planning, and then out. I think that would be where you'd want to focus. In terms of offices, also relatively good in terms of both prefab and modular. The office outlook, this is what we're seeing out through 2024, but believe me, that is largely driven by data centers. There's a lot of question right now about what's going to happen to the conventional, traditional office environment. I'm still working virtually, and I'm sure many of you are too. Education starts are going to rebound pretty strongly from the pandemic, so that's a good market. Warehouses, although it's been super explosive, if you've been paying attention, Amazon basically just shed a whole bunch of, millions of square feet of their overbuilt space. And we knew that an overbuild was coming. And so that's trailing off so much. So there's still plenty of money in that market. It's just not exploding to the degree that it did during the real run up and then the COVID boost. Amazon was the biggest builder, but they've way pulled back. Manufacturing buildings, that's definitely going to be this onshoring boom that we're seeing. It's going to be a great benefit to that. And you can see how incredibly choppy that has been. Really got whacked in the recession. It actually came back quite a bit, though, during COVID, and is looking like a good market to be in. And retail, as we know, it tends to follow residential. It hasn't gone away to the degree that people believe that it got creamed, but again, it's not a super robust part of the market. But looking at the percentage of users who are forecasting growth here as the vertical axis, and then our construction starts forecast as the horizontal axis, and quadrants here, you can see the office and the education is probably where you'd want to be looking at for more prefab opportunities. And the same thing with modular. Those are probably the two where you'd be expecting to see that there's going to be more growth in that modular, and where the projections are fairly high. So overall, there's definitely some headwinds here. There's clearly a knowledge gap, especially around how can a design be developed such that it really supports and facilitates prefabrication and probably modular. Lack of understanding of the benefits, right? We still have owners pushing back saying, why do I want this modular stuff? Lack of awareness of resources, but that does tend to be more strongly expressed by design professionals than it does by contractors. And then you've got authorities having jurisdiction. There are issues, especially around modular, in terms of getting that approved. But there's a lot of opportunities. There are very compelling benefits. You've got good growth in most of those target project types. Everybody's planning to expand the use is currently in the pool. They're all planning to swim down to the deeper end of it. And a lot of contractors are actually planning to add prefab to facilities to their current capability stack. So I know that was a kind of like drinking from a fire hose here. We zoomed through a lot of data in a short period of time. And I want to thank you. And please take advantage of this resource that we have. We've got our prefab studies up here, along with a whole bunch of other stuff up here that's going to be, you'll find something of interest to everybody. And they're all free. So just come there, download them. And that's all I've got for today.